I'm Melanie Johnson, along with my co-host Jenn Foster. We are both 13-time best-selling authors. We've published over 2,500 books and made all of our authors #1 bestsellers. We own Elite Online Publishing. If you want to become a best-selling author, look us up at eliteonlinepublishing.com. Now, welcome to the podcast that shares secrets from top industry experts that show you how to get lasting success and results. This is the Elite Expert Insider Podcast. Hi, everyone. This is Melanie Johnson along with Jenn Foster we're your hosts for today's show. How you doing today, Jenn?
Doing great. How is things going?
It's going wonderful. I hope everybody's having a fantastic day. So we have a really special guest today, Todd Uterstaedt, and he is, he owns, I want to say he owns, because you kind of can own your own podcast, like we own our podcast, from Founder to CEO podcast. And this is a terrific podcast that he has, and he knows all the secrets because he's interviewed all these people of what makes a great CEO and founder. So he's interviewed all of these people on his podcast. So we're going to find the backstage to all of the secrets that these founders and CEOs are doing. And in today's environment, it is really key to know what that is, to be able to pivot your business, to have that roadmap for you. So we're going to dive deep in that today. But first, we want to remind you, subscribe to their podcast. Hit that button, subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with people, because we always inspire you, motivate you, and you're going to learn something new that you can use in your life and share to your friend's life. So make sure you do that. So Todd, welcome. Thanks for coming today.
Hey, thanks so much for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Well, tell us, Todd, kind of how you got started into this and what made you get excited about starting a podcast.
Well, so we own a traditional executive coaching firm. And a lot of the founders in the Midwest, where I'm in Cincinnati, Ohio, they were graduating from accelerators and incubators. And it was a relatively new thing in the Midwest because a lot of people would go to San Francisco and Austin and LA and whatnot to start their business. And so people were getting successful here. And so I got a lot of phone calls from founders who said, "Hey, Todd, we heard you're a really good coach. You'll coach me." But our business was not set up for them. Mm-hmm. So I got frustrated. And so I said, you know what? I'm just going to interview, like no business model in mind. I'm just going to interview successful founders about their anti-hero journey story. Mm-hmm. Because everyone hears about everybody's entrepreneurial hero story. Yeah. But rarely do people get vulnerable enough to share some of the mishaps, the mistakes, and the misconceptions that, mm-hmm. kind of transform them along the way. So I started the podcast, and I was surprised that everybody wanted to listen to Goofy Me. And so it took off, and we've been doing it for 5 years now.
Well, you have such great energy, Todd. Every time I talk to you, you're just happy and you've got good energy and you bring out the best in people. So tell us, you were saying like the mistakes that they make. What are some of the ones that stand out to you the most that can help people?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I would say that there's this journey of self-awareness that occurs for most of us who are founders on this journey from founder to CEO. And we realize things about ourselves sometimes when it's a little bit too late because, in entrepreneurship, things happen fast. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to get in front of the next milestone that's going to occur. And so probably not being aware how our styles, our decision-making impacts the business until something happens. And we get this insight about ourselves that we can then apply to a next situation. I'll give you an example. I just interviewed Heidi Zach. She is the co-founder and CEO of Third Love. And Third Love is the third largest online place that women across the world buy bras and underwear. And, she tells the story about how she just couldn't believe that you couldn't buy half-size bras and all sorts of kind of stuff. And she uses data science to be able to help women with their fit finder to be able to determine the exact size, fit, and comfort for women's bras. And, she went on Good Morning America. And she tells a story that their platform was not ready for the intense public relations traffic that sent them away. And so everything crashed. Their whole site crashed because they built it themselves. So she said to me, it was very interesting. She says, I had to make a decision about whether or not we move from our own platform to a place called Shopify, which many of you have probably heard.
Mhm.
And she had to make that decision without a lot of consensus building. And a lot of her engineers left. And through that story, she learned not only about what her default influence style is, but also how to bring people along when you have to make decisions where there's not a lot of time to be able to spend sorting through things and building consensus. So, she realized these new things about herself that she wouldn't have realized had
Right.
the traffic of Good Morning and being on Good Morning America, her creative director being on there, had crashed her site. And so, but by then it was a little too late. So that's the biggest secret is,
Yeah.
how do you become very self-aware so that you're ready for that next challenge that comes along? And it's hard to do that.
Mhm.
Wow, that's such a great story. And it helps you to learn every time you're learning from someone else's failure. That's excellent.
Absolutely.
That's
Yeah.
excellent.
And I think you do have to take the time. One of the things that, like, behind the scenes that people tell me when they come on the show is they tell me, Todd, I don't think I've ever taken the time to debrief my story until coming on your show and
Yeah.
extract some of those learnings. In fact, one of the founders came on the show, said after we hit the stop button on recording, he says to me, "That was really therapeutic. Thank you."
Well, it's funny, like you mentioned, are you ready for success? So, like, take the Zoom platform. All of a sudden, it got inundated with all of these people using their platform, and it's like, are you ready? We've even asked ourselves, like, oh, all of a sudden, if we get 100 inquiries, it's hard to, it's like, who's going to manage all that? Who's going to, it's a good problem to have. Sometimes you have good problems because your business is growing, to do that. So do you keep giving businesses advice and counsel them through some of these growing things as well as interviewing them?
We do. We work one-on-one with founders and their leadership teams to help them not only understand themselves, but also understand the people on the team. Frequently, it's not the tech, and it's usually not product market fit, and it's not investor money that usually torpedoes a startup. It's usually relationships and communication. They often don't want to talk about that because it's kind of sexier to talk about, oh, we didn't get the funding that we needed, but you would have got the funding that you needed if you had a team that better communicated and collaborated together to be able to build something that was meaningful to people. And
Mhm.
so, it's really, we spend an enormous amount of our time dealing with, as you would imagine, the people stuff that's associated with the scaling of business.
So give us some communication tips. What are some things that we should do to communicate in our business? And I think that crosses over into the culture, right? Because your communication also expresses the culture you want to have in your business.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm an advocate of a tool that we use that kind of, it's been around for a while, but it flips this whole conversation on its head. And it starts with this concept that each individual has certain interpersonal needs.
Mhm.
And they could be different not only from our needs, which is a no-brainer, most people might assume that, but it might be different than their behavior. And
Yeah.
it causes confusion between their behavior and their actual needs. And
Mhm.
so we teach people, hey, you need to take the time to figure out what the needs and expectations are of that individual and not necessarily cue on their behavior or their interests, because you will miss opportunities to connect with someone. And so we call that the platinum rule versus the golden rule, because the golden rule says treat other people as you would have them treat you.
Right.
But what if you have different expectations than the other person, which is frequently the case? So it doesn't work when you apply the golden rule to interpersonal relationships. It certainly applies to the big issues like killing people and stuff like that, right? You don't want that to happen, of course. But when it comes to relationships, particularly startups, entrepreneurship, they
Mhm.
thrive when trust is high.
Yeah.
And as you know, you build trust when you listen to other people and when they feel listened to.
Mhm. It
Yeah,
kind
it's
of
just,
reminds me. Yeah, go
go
ahead, Jen.
ahead. Go ahead.
It kind of reminds me like of the five languages of love in a way. It's like,
Yes.
you don't want to give necessarily what you need because that might not be what somebody else's really needs when you're doing that. And being tuned in. I think both are applicable. Treat people as you want to be treated, but also be keen to what they need. And it's really hard to do that in a large company. I mean, if you have 50 employees, how do you know to do that if you're having to manage 50 yourself?
Yeah.
it's kind of daunting and overwhelming. And is there a rule to, like, when you're hiring people to bring them on their team, that you're looking for specific types?
Yeah, I think, obviously diversity and inclusion is a big topic nowadays, as it should be. And I add to the topic of diversity and inclusion, diversity of thought.
Mm.
Because you can have 10 people on a team who are 10 amazing women who happen to be all 10 Caucasian women. And they all could have the same thought processes, and the company could fail, because diversity of thought is a huge piece when it comes to diversity and inclusion. So yes, you want to understand whether or not they represent different perceptual filters
Mhm.
that's not currently residing on your team. So when it comes to discussing opportunities and issues, you have that perspective that you didn't have before. So I think that's just as important as a lot of the traditional definitions of diversity and inclusion.
I love that. Thinking about the way people think instead of just, how they look, right?
Absolutely. Because, I mean, how they look is important, okay,
Mm-hmm.
to a degree, but I frequently find that is a less of a determinant than
Yeah.
their knowledge, skills, abilities, and their perceptual filters, their thinking patterns.
Right. And their personality types, all of that all
right.
comes in together.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, part of their life experiences as well.
Yeah.
Like if they're all, like you were using women as an example, and they could be from all different backgrounds, all different colors and ethnic colors, but if they were all divorced women and had terrible divorce, they'd all be feeling maybe similar towards men or something.
Right.
You know what I mean? So you got to have that diversity of someone who has a great marriage, someone who is just married, someone who's been divorced. So you bring in that whole background of different people. I like that.
I think that's a fair comparison. I really do, because it is easier to make those determinations based upon what you can physically see,
Right.
and what you could potentially glean from an interview in terms of experience and background. It's
Mhm.
harder to measure diversity of thought, which is why there's lots of tools to be able to help uncover that.
Yeah. What do you think oh, go ahead, Jen.
I was just going to say, so tell us how you got your podcast started. So you just said, I'm going to interview these people, and then it turned into this successful podcast where now you're interviewing all these CEOs of these big companies. So tell us kind of how that came about.
Well, I'll get a little teary-eyed telling you this, because my very first guest was someone who believed in us, and she was our marketing person, and her name was Chelsea. And unfortunately, Chelsea died of breast cancer a year and a half ago. And she was instrumental in getting me and us comfortable with moving our professional lives into the digital world. And so she was our very first guest, and she gave me the courage to be able to do it. And I would tell you that there really wasn't a secret sauce after that. In the first year, it was simply using LinkedIn to be able to reach out to people who were founding CEOs, our guest profile, and asking hundreds of people and getting 99.9% no's. And then eventually just sticking to it for 5 years. The diligence and hard work. I'm a former Army officer, so like discipline is kind of part of who I am. And so just doing it week in and week out has led to some incredible people coming on the show, from Ben Chestnut, the founder of MailChimp, to, I mentioned Heidi Zach from Third Love, to the founder of Zoom. You were mentioning Zoom before, Melanie, to also the founder of Netflix was on the show a couple months ago.
Wow.
So, I'd like to just say we had a lot of people who were very willing to share their stories. I'm so grateful for that, because I get emails and phone calls from people around the world telling me how important it is for them to listen to these stories every week. And in podcast land, as you know, it's a little hard because you don't get a lot of feedback every day. Yeah. And so just 2 days ago, I woke up and I looked at my LinkedIn, and there was this message from this man in Colorado, I think. And he was listing all these people that he was grateful for. And he said the topic of his post was something like being grateful and expressing gratitude to people you've never met. And he listed me. And I said, gosh, thank you. But what could I possibly have done to help you out? And he says, I listen to your podcast on a regular basis. It was very helpful. I was like, oh, that means so much to me. Thank you.
So why do you think it's important for a business owner or for anyone to create a podcast and or be a guest on a podcast?
There is something very special that has happened with podcasting. And I, in terms of having a podcast, and I'll get to the point about being a guest in a moment, because that's even more powerful. But when you put earbuds in your ears, whether they're wireless or wired, and you're walking your dog, doing dishes, cleaning house, commuting in the morning, on your elliptical, on your Peloton, whatever, there is something very intimate about listening to someone in a podcast on a regular basis. I know this because I was driving up I-71 one day, and a man from Moldova, the country of, called me and said to me, "Todd, could you help me with this?" And he was going on and on and on. And it dawned on me, he felt like he knew me, like I was a trusted advisor to him.
Yeah.
But I didn't know him at all. And it suddenly dawned on me when I was listening to him, like, I said, "Well, who are you? And how do you know me?" He says, "Oh, I listen to your podcast each week." So there is this intimacy that is developed between you and your audience if you're focused on serving your audience. And I really strive to do that. I very rarely talk about myself in the podcast. Occasionally I do, but I try to make it so focused on what is the founder out there struggling with that they need to hear from other founders and how they've conquered those things so they can keep moving in their entrepreneurial journey. I mean, I'm like laser focused on that. So I think that intimacy is really helpful when you're building a business, because you grow trusting relationships that way. You know. Now, the other question was about why be guest on podcasts?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So this is right up your world now. Okay. I mean, I will tell you that you can launch a book and get it on the top 10 list nowadays if you create a podcast interview campaign that lasts, I'm going to say, about 8 to 10 months. Okay. Because the cycle of getting on podcasts is just it's not very direct. There's some time involved. But being a guest on a podcast, promoting books, promoting products, promoting a launch of a campaign, building credibility. I mean, because there are over 1 million podcasts now, over 1 million. And many of them are interview style podcasts. So you can reach a couple million people relatively quickly by being a guest on podcasts. In no other time in history has the democratization of being able to get your products yourself out there, even in many cases your book, than now by just being a guest on a podcast. It used to be you'd have to go on the Today Show, Good Morning America, the Late Show, and they would hawk their books, and the interviewers would pretend to have read their book, right? And they had a staffer who read it and gave them some note cards. Well, I read every book. No one comes on my show if they wrote a book without me reading the entire book. And so it's special to be able to do that. So I think those are some of the reasons. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And I really think that that's the best way to promote something, is to go on someone else's podcast. And to be honest, I don't know when the last time I watched the Today Show or any TV. I mean, I just subscribe to Hulu and Netflix and pick what I want to watch. So I don't really watch those shows. So if people are getting on there or paying to be on there, who's seeing them, right? So
exactly.
Why not be interviewed on a podcast where you've picked out the podcast and asked them to be a guest on their show, because that podcast is the best fit for what you're promoting.
Exactly. And I think the publishers are getting savvy to this.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think
and
so.
you create these assets. So now you've been a guest on all these different podcasts. You can put it on what we call the $1 million page, which is the Amazon author profile page, which you get to put videos on there. Oh. So you can put up to 8 videos on there. So you can constantly change those and show your new videos that you've been interviewed on. You also leverage those people's audience. So like you're leveraging our audience right now, right? You're getting to, I call it kind of hijacking our audience, right, that you're getting exposed to and talking about your business and who you are and getting familiar on a whole nother level. And then we have a book called Podcast Authorized, where you can turn that interview. So let's say you do 10 interviews, maybe they're all slightly different. You could take those and turn those into a book. Maybe you're talking about your products and services and you don't have a book yet. So you can either have a podcast and turn it into a book, or be interviewed on a variety of podcasts and turn that into a book as well. So there's just so many ways that you can leverage the whole thing, and the podcast lives forever. I mean, now I come from a TV background, owned a couple TV stations, and you couldn't leverage that so much. But now, on YouTube, the TV stations are getting savvy where they're taking their clips and putting it on YouTube, but they're not on iTunes and Stitcher Radio and Spotify, right? Where we can be everywhere. So it's a whole new market, and I think it's brilliant. And we're encouraging you to write a book with your podcast, because you've got so much great information there that can live to a whole nother audience, experiences in another format.
Yeah, I love that. It's interesting. We were talking before we started recording this, that I'm really interested in reading your book, because behind my head is Tim Ferriss's book, Tools of Titans. And he did exactly what you just said. He took his podcast interviews and turned it into that book. And it was a really popular book. And so I think, repurposing podcasts into a format that some people like to consume better. Not everyone likes to listen to podcasts. Some people like to read books. Is a great idea, and I'm looking forward to diving into your book.
Yeah, because earlier you can highlight a book, right?
Yeah.
So you can't highlight the podcast.
Right.
Well, tell us, you have a free giveaway today for our audience.
Yes. We have been working really hard to be able to help founders navigate a lot of the stresses that they've encountered. In the last 4 or 5 months, I've just been on the phone and on Zoom nonstop, helping a lot of founders through the COVID-19, and being an entrepreneur has been super stressful. So we created a course called Arrest Founder Stress at arrestfounderstress.com, where we teach founders what they can do practically to be able to reduce some of the stress that they're encountering. And it sounds a little selfish, but it's oftentimes about designing things around them that work for them, because founders are the emotional energy behind most startups. And so taking care of them helps the business. And so we have a little bit of a counterintuitive way of doing it. So it's a free course at arrestfounderstress.com.
Thanks. That's great.
We'll put that link up at the bottom. Can you repeat that one more time on the website?
Sure. That's right. It's arrestfounderstress.com.
Great.
All right.
Put that in the show notes.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for coming by today, Todd. Remember to subscribe to our podcast right here and share it and leave us a comment. We'd love to hear from you. And I hope you got a lot out of this. I think I got a lot. I was writing notes as he was talking. So we'll see you next time. Remember to subscribe and leave us a comment. And if there's something else that you'd like to see on our show or someone you'd like to see, let us know. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Hey, are you looking to increase your revenue, build credibility, and elevate your brand? This podcast is brought to you by Elite Online Publishing, an innovative publishing and full spectrum marketing company. They will publish and market your book to make it a #1 bestseller. Becoming an author is the best way to market your business. So contact them at eliteonlinepublishing.com today. All of their authors become #1 bestsellers.